Darkness. True darkness. I'm surrounded by total and complete darkness. Not the kind you see when you're in a dark room or when you close your eyes. No, this is like someone painted my eyes with the blackest of paints and buried me deep underground. It's stifling, pressing in around me. It's unnerving, but there's something even worse. The darkness is matched by silence. I've never heard nothingness before. I can't even hear my heartbeat. I can't feel my heartbeat. What is this? What's happening? Silly boy, you used up all your magic. Whatever are we gonna do with you? 10. No. I know that voice that isn't a voice, clawing at the back of my mind, begging me to remember. It's feminine, a woman, mom? No, younger, much younger. Where am I? The darkness suddenly fled and I found myself standing within a void of white. The silence remained. I check to make sure I'm intact by patting my body as I glance around for whoever's here with me. I've got all my parts, but they're not covered by anything. I looked down and confirmed my nudity, but something's off. I should have wounds, but I'm not hurt anymore. I was bleeding. What happened? The hole in my hand is healed and didn't even leave a scar. Wait, all of my scars are gone. What the hell? Did I die? Of course not. You don't die from using up all your magic, you silly little mudman. Cass laughed. You're also not healed. You look how you should look without the random graffiti that life tends to add. I quickly spun around. Standing in glorious nudity before me was Cassandra, the love of my life. Except it isn't. Something else entirely. I knew this instinctively, but it took my brain a moment to catch up. Cass wouldn't know about magic, and I don't recall her ever using silly little mudman as a term of endearment. The closer I looked, the more obvious it was that the thing standing in front of me wasn't Cass. Her hair's the wrong shade of blonde, her eyes are the wrong shade of blue, and she's shorter than she should be. You're not Cass, I managed to say, my breath fighting to stay in my lungs as if it didn't want to leave me. You see me as your girlfriend? What do? I ran out of breath. I panicked for a moment, but then realized I was fine. I couldn't breathe, but I also couldn't suffocate. Maybe I can just think. What do you mean? I mentally asked. Well, I'm not exactly appearing to you in a physical form. You're not exactly in a physical form either, for that matter. Your mind is struggling to interpret these things with visual. It smiled with Cass's mouth and audio stimuli. Are we in my mind? No, but your mind and soul are intrinsically linked. One cannot maintain its form without the other. Then where are we? That? The thing moved closer and fluttered Cass's eyelashes at me. Isn't relevant. I don't understand. I took a step back. That's obvious, and I'm afraid that your comprehension of our location isn't at all important. I was going to approach you as you slept tonight, but since the opportunity presented itself sooner— Approach me? I interrupted. Why? Because you're amusing. Not just to me, but to many others as well. Unfortunately for said amusement, you're unlikely to know what to do when you get to your next destination. You'll get there, seek out a scholar, get your little words translated, and end up right back to square one. It rolled her eyes at me. It would take you years to figure out the next step, and you don't have that long. Why not? Because some very stupid mer are getting ready to do some very stupid things, and that will result in your leads drying up. I stare at the thing in front of me, trying to work out what it's talking about. It's starting to look less and less like Cass. Her eyes are now purple and her hair was now gray, nearly white, but everything else remained the same. How do you know all this? I know almost everything that happens in the mortal realm, sweetie, it said with a smile. I know that you're a human. I know that Nash pulled you out of a dungeon. I know how you felt when you woke up. And above all that, I know what you hope to accomplish. It will be an absolute delight to see if you can do it or not. What are you, some sort of god? Well, it sighed almost comically. I suppose I have been called that. But unlike the gods you're familiar with, I had absolutely nothing to do with creating anything. Neither did any of the other beings known as gods, for that matter. Then why are you known as gods? Mortals love to name and classify things. They do their best to make everything fit into tiny little boxes, especially when they don't know enough about something to even begin to hope to properly classify it. Those with immense power that exist beyond their reckoning are stuffed neatly into the box labeled God. So this thing isn't a god, but is close enough to be called one. It's wearing Cassandra's face, but it claims it's not doing so intentionally. It can read my thoughts too, even when I'm not trying to verbalize them, but we're not in my mind. Doesn't really make much sense, does it? It laughed. If it helps you get over it, you can call this place limbo or purgatory. You're more familiar with such concepts, and the only real difference is that this isn't a waiting area for the dead. I see. Well, what do you call this place? I don't. Things like me don't have any reason to name things. Among ourselves, we're simply able to broadcast a thought with complete context. If I want a specific person to meet me in a specific place, all I have to do is think about the details. However, none of this is relevant, Nick. Okay, so we're in limbo, but not really. And you're a god, but not really. So what do you want with me? There we go. It raised an index finger and tapped my nose. Finally, we can get to business. You're going to Bolus here. When you get there, Yulk will want to visit some scholars to get the text you found in the dungeon translated. His childish thirst for knowledge will cause him to decline an invitation to see the dragon. Do not let him decline that invitation. It's hard to imagine Yulk turning down the chance to see a dragon. To him, it's just a sleeping dragon. It will be there once your task is complete. Whether he sees it now or 5 years from now doesn't really matter to him. The puzzle of what you are and where you came from is a much more pressing matter to the cutest little orc scholar. I found myself taken aback by that description of Yulk, but managed to press on. What do we do after seeing the dragon? The choices afterwards will be clear, and you'll know which one to make to continue your trek back to Cass. If you need another nudge at some point, I'll pop by. Why are you helping me? Just because I'm amusing? Don't underestimate the value of amusement to a being like me, but the actual reason is that I'm rooting for you. It smiled, but its mouth had changed. It wasn't Cassandra's anymore. The lips were fuller and the teeth were far more pointed. It would break my heart, metaphorically speaking, to see you fail your great quest. If it weren't for my pact, I'd tell you exactly how to get to where you need to get to. It gestured with one of its arms, and the sound of chains clinked from somewhere. I blinked in surprise and suddenly saw the source of the noise. She was covered in chains, and the links were made of solid crimson light. They sent sparks flying at even the slightest movement. I looked for what they were attached to, but the chains began and ended inside the being before me. I could only imagine that they were attached directly to its bones. How didn't I see these before? Your perception is limited, Nick. There's a lot that you can't see, hear, smell, or feel. Perception is a funny thing, though. Once someone points something out to you, suddenly you see it all over the place. It grinned. Its appearance had changed. It no longer looked like Cass at all. Its hair was radiant blue, its eyes were deep purple, and its skin had a mirror-like quality to it. It was still nude, but its proportions had changed. It was now taller than me and was shaped more like Nima than the Cass, including the odd alligator teeth that all orcs have. Somehow this set me at ease a bit. Should I tell the others about you? Yulk and Nash will believe you, so you can tell them if you think it will make things easier. If you tell others, they will understandably believe that you're not well in the head. This will add obstacles to your path that will require bloodshed to clear. It shrugged. Up to you, though. Bloodshed? Oh yes, it grinned again. Instead of gently pushing past the obstacles standing in your way, they'll force you to gut them and unleash rivers of blood that will flood along your path. Since violence begets more violence, more blood will inevitably flow. On the bright side, letting the violence guide you will get you to your goals much faster. The thing's smile erased any sort of ease I had felt up to that point. The smile spoke volumes, hinting at a macabre enjoyment of all things hateful and violent. I involuntarily took a step backward. I'd rather not, it interrupted with a sigh. I know, Nick, I know, and that's fine. It's only one way to get you where you're going. It's the most fun way, in my opinion. But I'm fully capable of understanding that you would find it a lot less fun than I would. It shrank a little bit, as if deflating, like someone had just told it that the next installment of its favorite slasher movie would be PG-13. Then it laughed a bit and came back up to full size. You have more questions, and we've got time. I'll answer what I can, though the answers will likely be disappointing, it said. What happened to me? How did I end up in this world? I don't actually know. You were outside of our perception until Nash lifted you from that altar. Is Cass okay? I don't know. She's outside of my perception. Damn. I crossed my arms to think for a moment. Why are you the one who's approaching me? I like to play with mortals, and so I'm far more familiar with doing so than others of my kind. Plus, I really wanted to. It smiled. I threatened to throw a temper tantrum if I wasn't picked. This threw me off. A being that people called God throwing a temper tantrum like a toddler. Then I remembered some of the Greek gods and felt kind of foolish. The thing smiled at me knowingly. I sighed and thought about what my next question should be. Will I make it back to Cass? I don't know, but we can't wait to find out. You don't know. Of course not. I have a general idea of how things might go if all the mortals involved make certain choices at certain times. But I don't actually know the end result until it happens. Well, all right then. Do I have a chance to make it back to Cass? The thing laughed and held up the chains, indicating that it couldn't answer. I felt a surge of anger rush through me, but quickly quelled it. The anger isn't exactly justified. The fact that we're even having this conversation means that it's at least somewhat willing to help. If anything, I should be grateful. What can I do to increase my chances of seeing Cass again? Train every chance you get. Learn new spells, put your body through hell. The stronger you get, the better your odds are. It smiled again. You have a lot of potential. If you start focusing on your endurance, you'll find that you can increase your strength faster than most can. Even if you fail to get back home, you'll be able to live comfortably amongst the mortals of this world. I was about to express my distaste at this possibility, but the thing held up a hand. It's time for you to wake up. Go see the dragon. Everything went dark again. The exploding cart caught me by surprise. Thankfully, I had quick recovery active because of the bandits. A new skill I picked up while training with Nick, and it does exactly as advertised. I was the first one up, my ears ringing and head swimming. I shook the cobwebs out of my skull and checked myself over to make sure I was in one piece. Lucky, no shrapnel wounds. As I grabbed my swords up off the ground and sheathed them, I looked around. Everyone else was on the ground. Yulk was just behind where I'd landed, and I ran over to him first. "Yulk!" I shouted as I shook him. "Wake up, brother. Tell me you're okay." He didn't stir. Shit. I tried to get his robe off so I could check him for injuries. I wasn't able to get it off, but I was able to get it open. He was wearing a tunic with shorts underneath, blood on his legs. I ripped his tunic apart to see if his chest was fine. No blood, and it was rising and falling to indicate he was breathing. I tore a strip off his tunic and bandaged the small wound on his leg. I glanced up and saw Imlor trying and failing to help Nick stand. As I straightened up to go check on him, I heard someone behind me groaning. Instinctively, I drew my swords. My axe, being as cumbersome as it is, had been left in the cart. I spun and barely managed to block the first bandit's strike as the second bandit was standing up. I'd heard the second bandit, which had ruined the first sneak attack. The other 5 were in no condition to fight. The second bandit took a moment to get his bearings as I took a slash at the first one, which he dodged. He wasn't able to dodge the follow-up kick, though. He hit the ground and rolled backward, and I followed and slashed with both swords. The bandit dodged backward again, which is fine by me. I want to distance him from Yulk. The other bandit saw our conflict and lunged at me with his spear. I parried it and blocked another strike from the first bandit. "Yulk!" Nick shouted from behind me. "Yulk's out cold," I replied, swinging at the first orc again. I hope he's just out cold. A coma would be terrible this far from town. I parried the spear again and rushed the bandit with the sword. He managed to block the strike to his throat but wasn't able to avoid the slash across his gut. It went deep and he fell to the ground holding his injury. I shut out his cries of pain as I turned my attention to the one with the spear. There's no need to worry about him getting back up. I know a fatal blow when I see it. The bandit with the spear also knew a fatal blow by sight and became more cautious. I darted forward and he leapt back while jabbing at me with the spear. If he were any more skilled with his spear, I'd be in trouble. However, after the fourth time of him jumping back and trying to poke me, I was starting to get annoyed. "Go to the hells, you bastard," the bandit growled at me. "Lead the way," I replied, slashing the tip off of his spear. The bandit looked at his spear dumbfounded, and I took advantage of this to use another skill I'd unlocked. I activated thrusting throw, and my sword leapt from my hand and plunged itself into the bandit's chest. His gaze moved from his spear to the hilt that was now attached to his chest, and then to me as he crumpled under the weight of death. This particular skill had come to me after constantly throwing Nick's training weapon back to him. I don't think he even realized that I'd activated the skill. He probably believes I'm just good at throwing training swords directly at his heart. I walked over to the bandit and pulled my sword from its fleshy sheath. I took this opportunity to examine the remains of the explosion and the other 5 bandits, which was a mistake. Even with all the death and destruction I'd seen before, the way their bodies were torn apart and contorted beyond recognition made my stomach churn. I turned away and closed my eyes, trying to think of anything else so that it wouldn't stick with me. Food's a bad thought. No, let's think about relaxing at the training field. Staring up at the sky, watching the clouds go by, Nima by my side, giggling at something I said. Not even a joke, but she found it funny regardless, a good memory to blot out the bad. "Help!" An unfamiliar voice called out from behind me. I turned to look and saw the dwarf we'd ran past earlier, now kneeling over Nick. Imlor was also on the ground. I wiped my swords on Spear Bandit's pants and kicked Yulk's shoe as I passed, but he didn't even stir. Gods, he's out for the count. I hope he's all right. "What's going on?" I asked the dwarf as I approached. "The gnome was hit and bleeding out, and the, human." "Human? What?" "He's a human. That doesn't matter, though. Focus up. What happened?" "Oh, I guess he figured out how to use healing magic. He used it on the gnome, and then passed out. He's wounded pretty bad. Looks like he was hit by a bunch of shrapnel," the dwarf explained. I knelt and checked the boy's wounds, and the dwarf was right. He had a hole clean through his right hand, another hole in his shoulder, 2 in his left leg and 1 in his right leg. I couldn't find any holes in his cuirass, though. I breathed a sigh of relief. "He'll be fine," I said. "And how can you say that? If he lost enough blood to pass out, then he definitely won't be fine. We gotta do something." "Look at the ground. There isn't nearly enough blood here to cause someone his size to pass out," I explained. "Plus our healer is down for the count. Ain't a damn thing we could do even if we wanted to." "We could bandage his wounds at least," the dwarf muttered. "Nope, with Nick that's a bad idea. I'll show you why." I grinned. "Hey, Ten, you there?" "Yes," Ten said with Nick's voice. The dwarf leapt back from the boy with startling speed. He didn't get far before he stumbled and landed on his ass, staring at Nick with an open-mouthed frown. Nick, however, didn't move at all. After a moment, the dwarf turned to look at me again. "Ten is a robot that lives in Nick's head and helps heal him," I explained. "I'm not a robot," Ten said. "Close enough. Anyway, he's got foreign objects in some of his wounds, doesn't he?" I asked. "Yes. And it would be a bad idea to bandage those wounds while you try to heal them, right?" "Correct. If you bandage the wounds, it would prevent me from removing the shrapnel. I would have to heal around it, and I would then have to force the shrapnel out of the body through the skin, which would take an annoyingly long time without surgical assistance." "There you have it," I said to the dwarf. "All we can do is wait for our injured to wake up. Nick healed Imlor, Ten's healing Nick, and Yulk doesn't have any visible injuries. He's probably got one hell of a concussion, though." I see," the dwarf said, starting to shake off the shock. "Anyways, I'm Nash. What's your name?" I'm Renva. Renv Marfix. Pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "Yeah, me too," I chuckled darkly. "So what were you doing out here, Renva?" "My uncle owns one of the biggest suppliers in Bolisir, and I was transporting mining equipment to Kirkana for him. Shovels, picks, buckets, and some bang clay. Recipe C," he explained. "The bandits weren't interested in the gear, but were convinced they could get a good ransom out of me." "Well, that explains the explosion, but that sounds like pretty valuable cargo. Why didn't you have guards?" I asked. I did, 3 of them. The bandits killed them and tossed their bodies in the cart. His expression went dark. They were friends of mine. We grew up together, but they became adventurers, and I became a businessman. Now they're dead. Sorry for your loss, I said gently. I know how hard that is. I've lost some friends, Nick suddenly sat up as if he were in the middle of a fight, and then winced at the pain his various injuries caused. He looked around in an odd way, as if glad his eyes were working. He looked at Renv, then at me, and then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. You all right? I asked. Yeah, I'll be okay. He looked at Renv again. Never mind, I'm fine. Just used all my magic. How's Imlor? He's out, but looks all right. Yulk's out too. He's not up yet? Wait, how long was I out? Just a few minutes, Renv said. I'm Renv, by the way. Didn't get a chance to make introductions with all the excitement. I'm Nick, the boy replied. Nice to meet you. They discussed how we had got to be where we are, but I was distracted by Yulk. He'd been out for a while. He'd probably taken a knock on the head, but I hadn't seen any blood. I wondered about trying to load Yulk and Imlor into the cart, but the Narses looked angsty. The explosion had probably put them on edge, and a kick from one of them would be bad no matter who it connected with. Nick, has your magic recharged at all? I asked. Let me check. He closed his eyes and concentrated for a moment. Yes, I've got about a quarter of it back. I want you to heal Yulk. Can you move? Not on my own. 10 says my leg's fractured. All right. Nick looked up at me questioningly as I stood and brushed the dirt off of my knee. I grinned as I leaned down, placed my arms beneath his armpits, and lifted him from the ground. He protested a bit as I carried him over to Yulk's still unconscious form, and winced as I set him down. Heal him, I said. What's wrong with him? Nick asked. I don't know. Probably took a knock to the head. Just cast the spell and let it figure it out. I'm pretty sure that's not how it works. I'm pretty sure it is. You think healers have time to figure out what's wrong with a person before they heal them? I asked angrily. But, fine, he relented. Leye ronim tsak. A faint light glowed around Nick's hand as the spell went to work on Yulk. I crossed my arms in satisfaction, but raised an eyebrow as I noticed the light didn't fade like it normally would. The spell was still going. Whenever Yulk or other healers cast a healing spell, the light would only last for about a second. Before I could say anything, Yulk's eyes shot open and he sat up. Nick let his arm drop to his side as Yulk looked around trying to figure out what was going on. Finally, my brother looked at us and tilted his head questioningly. You got knocked out by an explosion from the flaming cart, I explained. Then I healed you, Nick added with a grin. You healed me? Yulk asked with a shocked expression. Well, congratulations on unlocking your first healing spell. Which was it? Minor heal, Nick said. Good. That's the first level of healing. Yulk nodded, rubbing the back of his head as if it were sore. Nice place to start from. Is everyone okay? I'm fine. Nick's got some new holes and Imlor's unconscious, I explained. The dwarf that we rescued, Renvi, is also uninjured. I see. Where'd the flaming cart go? Already told you, that's what blew up. It had bang clay in it. Right, that makes sense, Yulk said as he carefully stood up. Shall we go check on Imlor then? I can't walk. I've got a fracture in my leg, Nick explained. Not a problem, I said with a grin as I picked him up again. Yulk and I walked over to Imlor as my new baggage protested again. The protests got a little more colorful this time, so I was less gentle when I set him down. Nick glared at me angrily as Yulk knelt to check on the gnome. Will he be okay? Renv asked. Yulk expressed as he rubbed his chin thoughtfully. What happened to him? A piece of shrapnel went through his gut, but he didn't notice it at first. He passed out as he was checking on me, Nick explained. Thankfully, it went clean through, so I cast minor heal on him, but he didn't wake up. Then I ended up passing out from using all my magic. Yulk looked at Nick with a confused expression. What else did you use your magic on? He asked. Nothing, Nick answered. But you have a ton of magic. Minor heal wouldn't even come close to using all of it, Yulk said. I used the spell until I ran out of magic, Nick explained. How many times did you cast it? As Yolk asked that, I made a connection between what Nick was saying, what Yolk was asking, and the strange length of time I'd seen from Nick's healing spell. I couldn't help but laugh, which made everyone look at me. When he cast Minor Heal, it seemed to last longer than when you cast it, I explained. I think he's able to continue the spell with just one cast. Is that so? Yolk turned back to Nick. I wonder what sort of effect that has on the healing. I don't know much about magic, Renvi interrupted, but is the gnome going to be okay? He's been out for a while. Right. He must have lost a bit of blood, but I can wake him up. Yolk nodded. Yolk then slapped Imlor across the face, the sound of which stunned the rest of us into silence. It seemed to echo around us. Nick opened his mouth, but Imlor mumbled something and his eyes fluttered open. He looked at each of us and sat up, holding the side of his face. What happened? He asked. Come on, get up. Yolk smiled down at the gnome. It's time to get back on the road.